Okay, we are live. Hello, everybody. Sorry for the wait there, but Magilla and I were kind of going over this a little bit and stuff. So, anyways, now we're going to go ahead and we're going to show what Gilla has been noticing, what Magilla has been noticing, and what he kind of wants to point out. Um, Obviously, we're looking to keep the information in this accurate. We're looking to get the most accurate information because we really want to know what we're dealing with. Ultimately, we want to have reliable numbers and reliable, you know, data. Basically, right? So that's part of the concern here. Would you say that's about right, Magilla?
Yeah, we're looking for good projections of what's going to happen. They should improve over time. So we know what to expect in the coming months.
Yeah, awesome. So obviously, to start the video out before Magilla starts getting into some more of his more technical analysis here, obviously I'm going to start out with my reminders, folks. Is be safe out there. If you don't have to go anywhere, don't. If you can stay home, do that. If you're like me and you are an essential worker, or if you have to get up and go to the store to get food and things like that, take precautions. I personally, whenever I walk into a store, gas station, use a gas pump, anything that I feel that hundreds of people touch in a given day before I get there, I'm putting on gloves. And if I'm walking into a store or some kind of market or anything like that that's in closed space, I'm putting on my mask. And I advise everybody out there to do that because it does appear the mask wearing cultures are flattening the curve, or at least they're doing a hell of a lot better than everybody else. So I feel hopeful for what wearing masks and mask wearing can do to limit the spread of this thing, and hopefully allow our economies to get back up at maybe a sooner point than would have been previously if people are wearing masks and can slow the spread of it that way. But we'll have to see how the data comes out over the next couple of weeks because people have only started wearing masks within the last 3 to 4 days. At least that's what I see here in California. I mean, people were wearing them, but now you're seeing everybody wear them for about the last 3 or 4 days, or at least 90% of people. So we're going to have to see how the data comes out on that in a couple weeks or so to see if the masks are being effective. But I'm hopeful about that. So I encourage everybody out there to take those measures. Keep yourself safe as best you can, particularly those with any kind of lung issues, COPD, asthma. You guys take care of yourself. Be careful. So that's what I wanted to say to begin with. And now I'll hand it over to the gorilla.
Hello, everybody. Just going to do a broadcast tonight to explain to you some things that happened recently. For those who don't know me, of course, I'm a gorilla that lives in a pet store. But sometimes I also have a life as a systems modeling engineer. So I've been especially paying attention to the modeling effort for the COVID-19 crisis, and reviewing the methods that have been used at a fairly in-depth level, and trying to find what I thought was the best model to predict the future. There's some cities and states and countries I've been following closely that I've been calling harbinger cities because they basically were infected first and will be the first to probably complete their entire infection and recovery cycle. So some of those cities are in the United States. I've been watching very closely New York City, of course,
right,
and also New Orleans and Louisiana. And in Europe, the two harbinger cities or harbinger countries were first Italy and then Spain. And unfortunately, the Netherlands and the UK have become interesting.
Oh, London's popping off sick. Yeah, I agree.
Now, I have a pretty deep technical background, and I started researching the models that were available. The president the president of the United States, in presentations, and his team of doctors referred to a few models a couple weeks ago. One was the Imperial College model from the UK, which had projected that if no mitigation steps were taken, that the United Kingdom could see as many as 500,000 deaths, and the United States could see as many as 2.2 million deaths. I went and I researched the model that was used there and the publication, and it's very interesting. He actually was the first one to introduce the concept of the mitigations and project how much effect it would have. I think that research has been very misrepresented, especially by politicians. Then I started looking at the model that everybody was quoting as having started around 90,000 deaths for the United States and had revised to about 62,000 deaths. And it was from a place called the IHME. So we're going to look through some tweets and maybe some emails I sent about the IHME. I apologize. I've been calling them the IMHE quite a bit because I'm not sure why.
Right. It's So, folks, what he's talking about, it's actually IHME. So, pardon any improper spellings, but he'll be saying it correctly.
Yeah. So this is a group out of the University of Washington with a very prestigious professor in charge of. I know there's at least 3 grad students or programmers there, and their work had been funded by the Gates Foundation. So Bill Gates had been providing some supervision to their work, and there were plots of theirs shown during the presidential briefings. I've also been looking for some other groups, and there are some groups I'm following in Europe who are primarily following the European countries. And for the United States, I found a new group in MIT that's called COVID Analytics that is trying to get their model is finally public. It just went public, I think, the last week. And they still have a known set of problems with it, but are hoping to resolve those and start being able to publish. So,
right.
In researching these, I discovered something about what a lot of people think is the lead model that's being used for policy decisions now, the one from the University of Washington. They provided their source code on GitHub, and I reviewed the results and saw some anomalies in their results and decided to look at the basis for their results, and I found a severe error in it. So I tried to contact them via email, and they're a very small group who's probably very famous now. So I wasn't surprised that I couldn't get my email through to them. I did get sort of a response, sort of a stock response to point me toward a white paper that had a better description of what they did. From there, I decided to try to get the message out. So I went to a competing modeling group and sent this information. I started tweeting about it, and I sent a bunch of emails into NBC and MSNBC. I provided information before on several topics. So Chris Hayes actually got back to me, and then Chris Hayes retweeted my first tweet on this subject and asked for comments. At that time, so what you can see on the screen is actually Chris's retweet.
Right.
And I guess I have, I don't know, I might have 1,200 followers, but Chris has a lot more than that. I'm not sure what the number is.
Could be more.
And after he retweeted me, I started getting an awful lot of people looking at this and replying to it. And it's been up there, I guess this is the second day. I've had over 200,000 views and on the order of 300 or 400 replies. I've tried to answer the replies, and pretty much all the technical people who reviewed my criticism have agreed with it.
Right.
The only thing I've seen that they've said is they wouldn't call it so much an error as a bad assumption, which
fair enough.
I'm not. I don't think it's fair at all. I think it's just dissembling, and in engineering,
fair enough. But
so what I'm going to try.
I get what you're saying too. So.
Yeah. But they're trying to be tactful. That's right. I try to be tactful too, but in my field of work, this would have been catastrophic, and we don't want to sit here and just say we made a bad assumption. If I'm modeling the trajectory of a rocket and I assume the Earth is flat, you could say it was just a bad assumption, but
you're right. I know
but it's going to be hard to orbit. Okay, so let's just get into this. So Chris said so one of the things I noticed was that the predicted results for this model always seem to be symmetric, and we'll talk about what symmetric means.
Right.
And one of the reasons I was reviewing their basis was to figure out why that was happening. So if you could pull up my my first tweet from within Chris's, just tweet, click on mine. Yeah, show this thread will work.
Yeah.
Okay, so there was a couple of problems with this tweet. So if we go to the top, let me just say, Twitter is the great, never lets you correct anything. So unfortunately, I gave the wrong name for the organization whose work I had the M and the H reversed. But the problem is that they gave me their documentation of what they were doing, and they were using a thing called a generalized logistic function, and they took a form of it that was oversimplified that forced their predicted results to always be symmetrical.
Mm-hmm.
So let's look what that means. So if we look at the equation, and I'm also having trouble because before you expand the image that I pasted into this tweet, Twitter in its great brilliance actually cuts off the equation that I'm referring to and shows this Gaussian error function, which has gotten a lot of people confused.
Understandably so.
So I'm really referring to this first equation called the generalized logistic equation. And this is a equation that was developed to do empirical fittings of growth curves. And it has some nice properties that can be modified that allow it to fit growth curves. So all it is a constant value divided by 1 plus the exponent of minus alpha times time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 3 parameters in there. P allows me to change the ultimate level, so it's sort of the gain. Alpha is the rate constant that affects the rate of change at the inflection point. And then beta is the offset from 0 where the inflection point should be. Okay, so of course, a lot of people, I guess, probably aren't doing math like this anymore in their life.
Most of these people aren't. I would agree. Yes.
Okay. So some of them are, but
I'm not saying none of them are.
And then the other part of this model was it did a very complex statistical analysis of the noise in the data that I think the professor had that canned, so they just threw it in. But it really is a secondary thing to everything they're doing. All right, so if we go to the next one on the thread. Okay, so if we pull up this image. Yeah. Okay, there. Okay, that's the answer. So So here is what that model is predicting for the total deaths in New York. And you can see that what it does is it plots the data to the point of the projection, and then going forward it has the dashed line. But what you can see is it's got an S curve, what we call an S curve, which is actually that general logistic function. And you can see that it's symmetrical if we put the origin at its inflection point in the middle. It has quadrant 1, quadrant 3 symmetry. So that initial rate of rise is going to be the same as the final rates of approach.
So that would be down this way.
No, where the S curve is.
Oh, you're saying this should match this.
Right. So you see how it's symmetrical.
Right.
And the reason it's symmetrical is because the curve they're fitting is always symmetrical. It has no degrees of freedom to make it asymmetrical. Okay, so let's close it. And then, so we can look at this. So this was a post that I tried to get people to understand. So this was being clipped off before you opened the artwork on the first one, and a lot of people were thinking I was referring to the Gaussian error distribution function, which is really just something they're using to model the noise, and I'm not even sure why, but I mean, normally you just calculate residuals and maybe calculate a standard deviation, but so this is just, and then if we go to the next slide.
Oh, you mean on that one? Sorry.
Yeah. So, or the next, yeah. So when we plot this function, so here P equals 100, and that's going to be the distance that the curve rises.
Right.
So it rises from 0 to 100.
Right. Yeah. So it goes from 0 up to 100. So that's P. Okay.
And then beta is 2, so the inflection point is going to be centered on time 2.
So that's why this is at the center.
Right. And then alpha controls how steep it is.
Okay. The rate of rise. Okay.
We can make it very steep by making alpha large, or we can make it less steep by making alpha smaller. The problem with this curve that they're fitting to the data is it's always got that symmetry.
Right.
Okay. And there's another way to look at that symmetry. If we can go to that that artwork where I showed the derivative of this curve. One of the nice things about this curve is it has an analytical derivative. So if you remember your calculus.
This one here?
No, we're not ready for that one yet.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so if we can go back to my profile page, so click on me.
Oh, those. Yeah.
Let's see if we can get back to the artwork. So we're looking for that one that has the S curve on top and then the bell curve on the bottom. There it is. It's upper right.
This one?
Yeah, I think so. Okay, so if we look at this generalized logistic function, you can see the S curve up here. Here we've got an offset of 0, and we've set the amplitude to 1. And I think here even the rate constant's 1. If we take the derivative of it, we get a function that represents. So if that top one was the deaths for a specific city, say or country, say Italy, the one on the bottom would be the daily deaths, so deaths per day. And so we've been talking about having that rising exponential section, and then an apex, and then a falling section. And you can see that this one's symmetrical, quadrant 1 to quadrant 2. It's really a mirror symmetry around the inflection point time.
Right.
All right. So because of that, So now let's look at some of the results that it predicted. So if we go in there to look at that one.
This one?
Yeah. Okay, so here's what it's predicting for New York. So one of the things is New York has just come up its exponential rise curve, and it may have reached an apex and seems to have a little plateau on the top.
Mm-hmm.
You might remember Governor Cuomo, if you've watched his briefings.
I heard him today talking about a plateau. Yeah, actually. I heard him on the news today talking about it.
Yep. The problem is that we don't know what's going to happen next. But what the University of Washington model does is it knows real well, because it assumes that what's going to happen next has to be what just happened. So it's going to plot a symmetrical. So these are the daily rates. So this is the derivative of the generalized logistic function. And it's going to plot that little bell curve. Now, if we actually saw the curve fit is actually going to be exactly like the projected side. And that curve fit function that goes through the observations would be a perfect little bell curve. So here it's peaking right around 800, which would be the p-value, and it's centered around some date, which would be the time value, the beta value. And right. Then they would have fit it to give the best rate constant. The problem is it's making an extremely optimistic projection from this point in time.
Right.
And on what basis does it know that's going to happen? And the reason it thinks it knows is it thinks that these curves always follow a symmetrical waveform or curve form.
Right.
And that's just a bad assumption that was made by the modeler.
Right. You just said bad assumption, by the way.
Yeah. Well, I called it a severe error.
Right, right.
All right. So if we go, let's go look at some more artwork in that section. And let's just find a couple other things. So start there. And that,
here?
No, we're not ready for that yet. Yeah, it's sort of like we want to click there, and we're going to just do the right arrow for a little while.
Okay.
What happens if you hit the right arrow?
Oh.
Seems like somehow you keep going.
Oh, I see. We can just scroll through them. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, so that's just the function again. No, keep going to the right.
Oh, sorry.
You've already talked through all these. Okay, so go back a few. Or we can start there.
Or wherever.
Yeah, so one more. Click to the right, or there.
Right? Oh.
All right, so this is actually the plot I was looking for. One thing they did was they started projecting Italy. And I was looking at Italy's projected error band. And they seem to think, this model seems to think it knows that Italy is going to stop at like 21,000 deaths and never go any further. You can see it thinks it's true within like 500 deaths. And this was one of the curves I was looking at when I said this model has something wrong with it.
Right.
The reason it's doing that is they're doing sensitivity analysis when they do their curve fit. And what it's saying is that the set of the three values for the curve fit are not very uncertain for the optimum. There's a strong optimum for the curve fit.
Mm-hmm. So
they're basically saying that data set that includes the initial rise and the inflection point and some of the slowing is very, very well curve fit for a specific set of parameters. The inflection point's known, so that makes beta. If beta is not where the inflection point is, and then the rates known, and then the distance from the start to the inflection point. The curve has to be twice that high if you're fitting this curve. So the parameters are locked in. It's curve fit, and it thinks this has to be the curve that it is.
Right.
But the truth is, it's not true at all. This is just, I'm going to say it, it's a severe error in this model. All right, so if we go to the right, go to the right, don't close it. One more. Okay, so this is Italy's daily deaths curve. And this is another curve I looked at, and I said, there's something wrong here. So what's happened in Italy is they rose a steep curve. They seemed to reach an apex. They floated around their apex, and now they're coming down, but they seem to be like on a little shelf shoulder there.
Yeah.
And what this model, curve fit model, is saying is what's going to happen is this thing is going to immediately go to zero.
Right.
And it's saying, I know that with great certainty. Well, actually, it doesn't know that with great certainty. The only reason that's happening is because it's assumed it knows the underlying form of the curve, and it's seen enough of the curve that the parameters to fit that curve have to be certain values, or it won't fit the curve well.
Right.
Okay, so
what we're saying is that there's probably a good chance or whatever that this side of the bit is going to come out more kind of like maybe like this or something, right? Yeah.
So when we look at more, it ends up, I think, looking like a decay curve, but it's a slower decay curve than the rise curve.
Right.
But it looks like an exponential decay, but it's not gonna. There's no reason to think it's going to happen fast.
Like it's just going to drop as quick as it came. Yeah, I agree.
So that's what's wrong with this model. Now, so if we think about it, if you just stay here and think about that curve in your mind, that slower exponential decay, the distance between zero or this curve and that curve is added deaths, unfortunately.
Right. Yes, of course.
And
which is sad, but
right. So this model, unfortunately, is projecting way too few deaths on the backside of the curve because of this this bad assumption that was made in the model formulation.
Right. But as Italy goes on for say another couple weeks, though, if we see that this doesn't drop to here in the next week, we know that it's probably not. We know that the data is going to be proving to be different than the curve, right?
Right. So that's why I'm keeping an eye on Italy and Spain as harbingers of the future.
Right.
They're at least past their apex. The United States has New York as our most advanced form of the curve,
right.
And it's right at its apex. And we're trying to see what the curve looks characteristically there.
Right.
In places where there was a major outbreak. We do have some finished curves for places that quarantined the virus very well quickly.
Right.
But they're not very representative of what we have here, where there's a large amount of virus already in the
population.
In the population.
Right.
Okay, so now we can. So I started once Chris Hayes put this out. I tried to make most of these arguments on Twitter. Twitter isn't the best place to make a technical argument. But the one good thing about it is everybody's got a pretty short attention span. So, I mean, all I got to do is probably catch somebody's eye for 18 seconds or something. So I did, after the retweet by Chris Hayes, I did get several modelers that were in Europe to comment on my finding, and a whole lot of other people. and a lot of doctors, like,
Mhm.
they think they all should have an opinion. um, so one of the things that I discussed with a modeler that's in Italy trying to study the Italian curve. If we go back to the left here, we both agreed that the approach wasn't as big a problem. So this is the curve that was used in the model. So keep going back. There's actually another form of this curve that was developed later in history. I think the form here was developed like in 1931.
Mm-hmm.
So keep going back. I think they had to solve things with a slide rule, and it was a little harder back then. Keep going back. Yeah, we saw that one. That's the ridiculously narrow error bands is the big.
Right.
And it's projecting yet another symmetrical S curve. Keep going back. Keep going back. More. 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 All right. Now we're ready. So there's a version of the logistics function that's been extended that's called Richard's function after I think he's the one in 1931. The other form might go back to 1831 or something.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure what the mathematicians were studying at. These curves were originally used to study growth, biological growth, where they really didn't have a mechanism, but they knew it grew from one place to another and had S curves, and they just wanted to characterize them and then be able to predict in the future. Now,
Right.
the neat thing about this one, it has a few more constants. So now you can have a starting offset A, and you're going to jump to level K because the level of the rise is K minus A. That's not very big a difference. You can have a C in the bottom instead of just a 1 and a Q. Those don't really make a huge amount of difference, but they allow to model some curves that are in slightly different shape.
Right. Okay.
But we have this exponent, 1 over V. So you'll remember for fractions, if we start out with like the fraction 0.5 and we take it to the half power, it becomes 0.7. The square root of 2 over 2. So what this does is it allows us to change the shape of the S curve, and it allows us to make it so the starting growth rate and the ending growth rate are different.
Okay.
Okay, so if we go a little further,
Which way?
to the left this time, or right.
Oops. Normally go right.
Yeah. Nope, that was 2 clicks. I think we only wanted to go 1 click.
There we go.
Okay, so what we have with this S curve is if we vary, this is varying values of nu, or the thing that looked like a V. It's really
Right.
Greek nu. And you can see that this S curve is capable of having a slower start and a faster finish.
Right.
It's also capable of doing the opposite.
Right.
A faster, actually, the 1/2 case there does have a faster start and a slower finish. And as you make that number lower and lower, going towards 0,
Right.
you create a whole family of curves.
Right. So what he's saying, folks, is if you look at these, you can see how flowing this line is up here, and you can see all up here. These 3 lines are all pretty much very similar, you know. And then when you get down here, see how sharp this one turns. See how this one becomes less sharp, and how this one's almost getting to the point of being a straight line, almost, you know. So that's what he's referring to, that this side can be different than this side according to this equation. So that's the important takeaway.
Right. And if we, unfortunately, I didn't find an easy to show plot of this this function's derivative. The green line in the middle here is actually the same as the generalized function. And then this is showing new values of 0.5 and 2.
Okay.
But as you vary nu, you can change the shape of the curve. You also change a little bit the offset of the inflection point, because the inflection point doesn't stay in the same place. Actually, the inflection point stays in the same place, but it moves up and down.
Right.
Okay, so if they had fit this curve,
go to the next one.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that message means from Travis, but no.
Somebody made a comment earlier, and Travis answered it well, so I put his comment up.
Yeah, I'm not sure who Omeus is, but
he's some guy that commented earlier.
Okay, so if you fit a curve like this, then what you could do is fit the characteristics of the slower decline after the rise. Now, what they could do to fix the model in Washington is use a form of their equation that had a 1 over nu term, and then fit that nu to the Italian data, say, and then decide that nu is going to be characteristic for all the curves. And it would predict similar curves where it would have a faster rise and a slower decay. And that shouldn't be too hard for them. I didn't hack their code and fix it, but it was in Python, which was a little bit of a discouragement.
Right.
I would have preferred another language myself, but so that's probably next steps for them. The other thing I did was I evaluated the model that was on the COVID analytics site. Their model is a totally different type of model. So let's see if I got artwork for it. So let's go to the left until you see like a state diagram with a bunch of circles. I mean, to the right.
To the right. Okay.
I'm not sure. Better put a sock on my left hand or something.
Mm-hmm.
The one I eat the bananas with. Keep going.
That one?
Yeah, but go back one, because also this is another error I found in that model, is what they're doing to curve fit and estimate parameters is looking at these curves. And these curves are just, the signal to noise ratio is very low.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they thought it was critical to model the noise. Of course, the noise here is primarily human behavior of maybe not tracking as many one day as the next, and then catching up the next day. And
okay.
And why they would want to model that or think that it follows a standard Gaussian distribution and fit parameters to a Gaussian distribution to describe it, I don't know. But what they've also done is they've broken down their data into 2 small observation sets where the signal to noise ratio has dropped dramatically because they've done that. So I'd have, and it's not really clear if these curves could help you train to predict the proper shape of these epidemic curves. But all right, so let's go to the next one. Now the COVID analytics model. The COVID analytics model is based on a set of epidemic models that have been evolving. They started out with one called the SIR model.
Mm-hmm.
So S is your estimate of the susceptible population. And the reason it's susceptible is because some people could have base immunity, or you could assume that some percentage of your population has been given a what do you call it? a flu shot or
a vaccine?
A vaccination. Yeah,
right.
a vaccination, so they're not susceptible. So
Right.
you start out with your susceptible population at some percentage of your total population. And they become infected. So in the original model, they'd go to state I when they got infected. And then at some rate, they would recover that was proportional to the number of people in state I. And some of them might die and go to state D. To model more complex things, these models have evolved and they added a step called exposed to model viruses with incubation. So you go from susceptible to exposed,
Mm-hmm.
and then following a model of the exposure dynamics, you go from exposed to infected, and then you progress from infected to diagnosed, hospitalized, diagnosed, quarantined, and I think
Right.
A is like unnoticed.
Oh, like no symptoms or whatever, right? Okay.
No, you just weren't noticed by the healthcare system.
Oh, you were sick and just kept it. Okay, right. Okay.
And
Kept it
then
to yourself or at home. Right.
right, so they have some ways to estimate what fraction that is, and then from there, from any of those states, you can go to either recovered or dead. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so this isn't a so the other model was an empirical model that knew that we were going to see growth curves and assumed that a continuous growth curve that would increase exponentially at first and then exponentially slow down would fit the curve well. Unfortunately, they assumed it had to be symmetric, which I don't think fit the curve very well. This one is actually trying to be more mechanistic, but so if we go to the next page, do I actually have the differential? Yeah, so here it is in differential equation form. So it's just a system of ordinary differential equations.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure everybody knows how to solve those numerically. And it has a whole bunch of fitting parameters. So alpha, gamma, everything in the site. And then it has some functions that are defined to describe the susceptibility, infection rate, or the exposure rates. And you solve this with ordinary differential equation solving framework using something like a Runge-Kutta integrator or something. So what they do here is they actually run this ordinary differential equation solver, and they do a search for the best fit, estimating it on a least squares basis, and they can do it for more observations than just deaths. So they can actually, if they have data from the that tracked all these different states, they can actually try to make their model fit all these different states. Mm-hmm. And they got this model running, and it made predictions. But I did review the results of the model and have a couple exchanges with one of the programmers, and they said they have a known problem in it that it's under predicting right now, for a few reasons. And it's predicting about 75,000 casualties in the United States versus the 62,000 that the Washington model predicted. Right. And they say they know what's under predicting. So I'm trying to keep an eye on them, see how their model's going to work out. The good thing about having this more mechanistic model is that the shape of the curve will be based on sort of these states that you're moving through that model the problem a little bit better and have a better shape of predicting the shape. And then it still has plenty of adjustable parameters to force it to fit curves.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Now, the other problem with both these techniques that was brought up is when we've only seen the front side of the curve, we don't have any data to fit the back side of the curve. And that's why one person was saying that the Washington model decided to assume it would be symmetrical, because if they didn't, all the parameters that characterize the back side of the curve would be impossible to determine. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what we're really saying is we don't have a whole lot of data on what happens on the back side of the curve.
Right. Yeah, we don't have it yet. Right.
Right. And that's why we're keeping our eye on these harbinger cities that are going to give us a good, or countries.
Countries, right.
And cities too. New York City's one.
And cities, yeah.
Yeah. And they're going to tell us what the backside of the curve can look like. And then the nice thing is once we have models of what the backside of the curve looks like, we can probably estimate these parameters from prior countries or cities and use it to project better the cities that are getting infected later.
Right.
Unfortunately, right now, I don't see any of these models being mature enough to make accurate predictions, but they do provide guidance, and unfortunately, I think the bias in the Washington model was that it underpredicts.
Sure. It assumes asymmetrical curve, right?
Right. So that's pretty much the story.
Okay. Are you ready for questions? Because Travis has got a few.
Yeah, we might want to just stroll through here and see if there's any more artwork.
Sure. Let's see what else there is.
We've already seen that. I think. Yeah, that's Italy or Spain.
Right.
Italy and Spain are almost in the identical position right now, and that shows the problem with the symmetrical assumption.
Right.
And then somebody asked me what would be a better curve using the Richards formula, so I flipped over the example diagram.
Right. It's upside down. I can see. Yeah.
Yeah, and the blue line would be probably the best thing we would have.
Right.
Because it slows down as it's approaching its final value.
Apex, right.
Okay. And then, all right, keep going. Yeah, I use the same figures a lot. So here's the actual data for Italy. So you can see that it's not looking symmetrical.
Yeah, it's kind of going flat.
It could be decaying. It's just decaying.
Let's give it a few more days, eh?
Yeah, but I mean, that's the other thing is the data, even Italy, which was one of the further cases. Now, China's curves just stop all of a sudden, which is why we think China didn't share all their final data.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the case.
And they did get extremely aggressive in quarantining at the end. And that might mean that they just didn't collect the data.
I mean, even here's the apex. I mean, here it is, but it looks like it's flattening out and kind of dropping off slowly, like we were saying.
Yeah, but that's Spain. So Italy and Spain are showing real similar shapes.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
And then here's the curve of Italy with the ridiculous error bar.
Very narrow margin of,
because I call it a severe error. Now, this is something else. So this was their projection for New York City, and then I overlaid the data for Italy.
Right.
And New York City, oddly enough,
see it's clearly coming outside of the curve, folks.
Yeah, all those are extra deaths, unfortunately. And
unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, and the curve projects that Italy should already be down around 0.
Right.
And that's why when we see Italy's projected curve, I mean, it wants to pull it down to 0 because it wants it to look like that. It thinks it knows the amplitude, it knows the whole initial rise, so it wants the back end to
match, right?
To snap back down.
So, all right.
All right, so we can turn to some questions.
All right, Travis, first one, he was asking about the sigmoid curve.
Yeah, the S curves. Yep.
and whether or not it's symmetric.
The sigmoid curve is very similar to the original logistic curve. It is symmetric, and then they've made enhanced versions of it that that provide more flexibility. And the sigmoid curve, I actually think the generalized logistic curve sometimes is referred to as a sigmoid curve. So,
Right. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. So when you're doing an empirical model, you want your model to be able to fit the data however it comes out. You don't want to force a form on it.
Right. Well, yeah, that's kind of like, adjusting the facts or adjusting the evidence to fit your narrative. I mean, so anyways, no.
Yeah. So when you plot it in Excel and you see it isn't a straight line, if you fit a straight line to it, it'll just sort of, cross the curve in a couple places. And you know that you probably have to fit a higher order polynomial to it, or some other function that has a curve in it. It's the same thing, and they chose a curve that couldn't represent the data, which was a bad assumption.
Right on. Okay, Travis then asks, how do you factor in age distribution, and did they do it correctly?
Okay, so they had. This is interesting. They have a paper that writes up a whole bunch of information about their model that doesn't match their code. So, they looked at four samples of data for death rates versus age. They looked at China. They looked at Italy, and they looked at New York, where they had enough data reported on that to include it.
Right.
And then they chose a value that was intermediate, either intermediate between the extremes or closer to New York when they were projecting New York.
Okay.
How that factored into the curves they eventually fit. The curve fit program doesn't use that information at all, so I don't have access to any software where they're actually using the things they're discussing in their white paper. That would probably be a good thing to ask them questions about at a conference table. But what they were doing was they were matching the data sets to cities that they thought had similar characteristics. So there's some way they were mapping their what they call their model cases against the result sets, and then choosing some of the fit parameters based on it. But I think they were just choosing their initial fit parameters. So where the curve fitting exercise would have probably eventually discarded all that information.
So basically, need to collect more information regarding that, or need to ask them about it, maybe, or try to collect more info.
I think eventually they're going to realize there's a lot of egg on their face, and I would see that the University of Washington team is probably gonna issue some major updates.
Right.
Okay. The group at MIT, their model was called Delphi, and they were testing and comparing themselves. One of the things I've seen in curve fitting is people don't plot it out for themselves and look at it. Like you run your regression test, you see it works, and you just publish your results without ever looking at your curve fit. At least the guys at MIT were looking at their results, realized something was wrong, and were fixing their own errors. So that's a very good thing.
Yeah, sounds like MIT might get to the more accurate model quicker.
It was also the scary thing at MIT. It wasn't engineers. I would have trusted engineers more, but it was guys out of the Sloan Business School. So 20 of them.
That's funny. Well, at least you know they know numbers.
And the professor's CV was 40 pages long.
Oh, wow.
So,
40 pages. Wow.
So they were budding quants. Off to head to Wall Street to steal money from people.
Yeah, you know.
High-tech means.
Okay, so Travis then asks, Italy has the highest median age in all of Europe. Top 3 in life expectancy year in and year out. U.S. is in the 30s with Cuba. Will that reduce our numbers?
It logically should. The model that's mechanistic would definitely predict it will.
Just because having a less population of older, more frail people that would succumb to it?
Well, in each of those states, they're tracking people by age, and they're using
right.
the rate at which you go from the infected state to the dead state is a function of your age versus going to the recovered state. So, and they are not assuming that the exposure is a function of age. Or actually they are. They're assuming the exposure is a function of age too, because there's a distribution curve known on what percentage of people getting hospitalized are in each age group, or what percentage of confirmed cases are in each age group.
Okay, all right.
So so even though it's really a bunch of parallel states by age group, and they do model the age distribution. And if you have an older population, the model will predict you'll have more deaths.
Sure.
Now the actual mechanism in society may be, I mean, ideally we'd quarantine the older people better and keep them from being infected.
Right.
The young people are probably going to be out there. So, and we are seeing as a percentage of total cases that the elderly people are a smaller percentage of total cases than they are as a percentage of the population.
Right.
So
well, and plus the way this thing seems to be running through care homes. Holy crap. Seems like everywhere I hear about now, it's like it's 80% of the care homes in this country or this city or this whatever. It's like wherever these like nursing homes and stuff, it seems to run through there like gangbusters.
Yeah, no, one of the bad things I've heard today is that some doctors are tracking patients who become symptomatic and they don't test positive for 3 or 4 days, getting tested every day.
Oh, wow.
So there's problems with the tests. It isn't just the ability to produce them, but the number of false positives, the false negatives, and also how much incubation they need before the test actually detects the virus.
Right.
So at initial infection levels, the virus isn't detectable even by the PCR test. And then it has to incubate for some time before it's at a level where it's detectable by each of these tests.
Right.
I mean, and then the antibody test, you actually have to develop an immune response that's detectable before. So there's issues. It's not as easy as drop the litmus paper in the liquid and see what the pH is.
Right.
But we're hoping to get there.
Yeah. Right on. Okay, Travis then asks, has the rate of spread remained constant across the states and countries? And then as a further question, is any of the data coming out of China reliable?
Okay, so some interesting things. So I've been looking at per capita results versus absolute value results and comparing different locations. And what I've seen is a lot of locations seem to show the exact same absolute values, even though they're in different places. So there seems to be, if you have a urban setting of a certain population density and you have an outbreak, there seems to be a natural outbreak curve for Western societies that's very similar. And I'd say like 5 of the U.S. cities are tracking it, and several of the European cities are tracking it. It appears to me that the New York City area had multiple outbreaks. So that's pretty large regions of the city that didn't interact, where the epidemic was able to expand exponentially in parallel. So New York City looks to me like it had 5 different outbreaks in it. That's why its rates are so high. And it looks like New Jersey had 2. So most of the cities are on 1. And then the cities that quarantined or social distanced, we're really all just self-quarantining. And when we go in public, we try to stay away from each other. Cities that did that rapidly are on a different curve. But the ones that got infected and had at least 2 weeks of the virus running wild before anybody did anything,
right,
they seem to progress in a very similar way.
Sharon is asking if there's any thoughts, if you have any thoughts about the people testing positive for a second time.
Okay, so a couple.
You're not a doctor, of course, but you know.
Well, I can tell you from the modeling perspective and from being able to be assured that you don't have infected people going around in society, all those complications have to be figured out. There's some patients that have recovered from very severe states of illness and are still testing positive for the virus, and we don't have any evidence. I think that we have no evidence of immunity other than analogous viruses have always shown it. So when you develop the antibodies that eventually let you destroy the virus in your body, with other viruses, those antibodies are produced by your body for a considerably long time and give you immunity. But we have no clinicals where people are reinfecting people after they've recovered, and I don't think that's considered ethical. So they're going to have to figure out another way to look at it. Hopefully, they can do something in a petri dish or with an animal study.
Right. Okay, so Travis brings up another interesting question here. He's asking about a jail in Houston that has had a huge increase in positive cases in just a few days. He's asking if anybody has modeled a sealed environment or that you've noticed.
Well, I mean, we got the ships are all showing. In general, I'm sort of an expert on Navy ships, among other things. And one thing that's different about ships is the HVAC systems have to circulate a lot of air because the inside of the ship will suffocate otherwise.
Right.
And there's a huge common central air duct system. So everybody's really breathing the same
air. Right.
Now on a Navy ship, we break the ship into fire zones where we have a bulkhead that we can seal to keep a fire from jumping from one area of the ship to the other.
Right.
And the ship is also designed to block in ventilation everywhere so it can put out a fire. But it's not designed to have separate ventilation in each space. So the bad thing is you're moving a lot of air through the ship. The air flows through the entire ship, and you're sharing your air like on an airplane with everybody in there.
Right.
Now the prison, some prisons are similar. You don't have separate air conditioning in each cell, if you have any air conditioning. And as it gets hotter, it'll probably be more problem that they have to move a lot of air through there. I have seen a couple of articles on the prison system problems, but it's definitely not something I'm an expert in.
Sure. All right. We'll have to get to the enclosed or sealed things on another later date.
Sounds like Travis wants to do some math.
Travis has got all kinds of questions. He's let's see. This one here, let's see. Okay. Let's see what we got. We had jailhouse. Okay, Jamie Van Hoot is saying, what are the long-term effects after having the virus? Any weak lungs or respiratory problems? Now that's getting into the medical area, but do you have an answer?
I've just heard one news report that anecdotally people who've been on a ventilator longer than a week are having pretty significant recovery problems.
Getting back to breathing normally.
Both atrophy and their lung condition is not
the greatest, right? After just
their lungs are severely damaged by the insult that cleared. So there's going to be time for them to come back. And I heard one doctor say that probably on the order of 6 months to get a full recovery.
Yeah. For the people that were on incubators, huh?
Ventilators. Yeah.
Ventilators, sorry.
Yeah.
Ventilators.
Yeah.
I don't know why I keep making that mistake. God darn it.
Yeah, they're similar words.
From the model of smallpox and benefits of mass. Oh, Travis is quoting somebody here. I simply wish that in a matter which so closely concerns the well-being of mankind, no decision shall be made without all knowledge which a little analysis and calculation can provide. He says that's a quote from Daniel Bornelli in 1760, who modeled smallpox and benefits of mass.
Yeah, well, I actually think the first modeling paper from Imperial College, I can't quite remember the author's name, but he's the one that testified in Parliament, is really an excellent paper at explaining how bad the outcome could be and identifying steps that could be taken and estimating how good they would reduce. And I mean, it's not quantitatively correct, but it's qualitatively taught all these concepts to everybody. So I think that paper will really stand out as something that really helped us through this.
Right.
So cheers to that, blimey. I think I might have it here. Yeah.
Ventilators are invasive. I know they use them during surgeries and stuff. I mean, for, well, at least I guess sometimes they use them. But yeah, what Martha Dickinson's saying is that that they do damage, that they are kind of damage. They can kind of damage your lungs, apparently, is what she's saying.
Yeah. It looks like Travis has something there even sadder. If your lungs
went fibrotic, it is permanent, right? And there has been some patients with long-term heart conditions. Ooh, yikes!
Yeah.
No, I know, folks. When you start feeling the effects of this, if you start feeling it going south, you need to get into the doctor, because I've heard that now many times about the fibrosis or the fibrotic material that starts to develop. So take that stuff seriously, folks. I mean, if it starts to get bad, get attention.
Now, I had a fever, and my doctor said if I had any respiratory symptoms, I should come and get tested.
Mm-hmm.
But if I didn't have respiratory symptoms, I was safe to stay out. And I did run a fever and had sinus headaches, but it could have been. My wife had gone to Florida before this started, and she could have brought back a flu from Florida. I wasn't vaccinated for, so.
Martha's saying you have to be sedated the whole time if you're on a ventilator. Ooh.
Well, the ventilator's going to actually force your breathing. It doesn't follow your breathing. So.
Which is why you were talking about atrophy, because your muscles, basically the diaphragm becomes weaker during that period, right?
Yeah, and if you're on it for weeks, some of these people are on it 21 days. There was a really good study, the Resvitiadine, the drug they were giving it to patients as a last recourse. That they actually got 56% of the people on ventilators to recover on it on a 10-day course of the drug. That was a really good. That's probably the best thing I've seen in terms of looking for a good treatment. Right. It was an antiviral that was developed and successfully was used to help treat Ebola.
Wow. Okay. All right.
And the mechanism blocks replication at the RNA level by mimicking an enzyme but not working. So it binds to sites that an enzyme would normally bind to but doesn't work as the enzyme. So it slows the reaction rate to replicate the virus. And it did look like it was effective. It was also a third-generation drug. So. And the other two generations were successful, but had side effects that they're trying to get rid of.
Yeah, you don't want the side effects.
This one was apparently it starved cells of ATP, so they added some phosphate group to it to actually donate ATP when it decomposed, and it's supposedly working for Ebola. Now, Ebola is a much more severe infection, but it's not a lung infection only. So the lungs are a real bad place to get infections.
So, all right. Any more questions, folks? Chloroquine has serious side effects, Travis says.
Yeah, the hydrochloroquine is there's a fairly large number of cardiac events occur on it, and so they don't recommend anybody with COVID-19 getting it if they're not in an intensive care setting where they can be monitored for severe cardiac events. There is an enzyme test that rises before the risk of cardiac events becomes very high. So there's a way they can sort of tell if it'd be a good idea to get you off it.
Okay. Yeah.
That's
obviously our medical communities are going to be continuing to learn as this is going. So hopefully, over the next month or two, more effective treatments are going to emerge, and so you know how we are. We're industrious as humans. We figure things out eventually.
Yeah. So I think the doctors are getting a lot of patients to look at that drug I talked about. It was originally just given for, I can't remember what the word is, but that last chance care, and they just opened up a large clinical on it. And at least last time I looked, 10 people were already enrolled, and they opened enrollment worldwide. So they said the study would last 28 days from the last patient enrolling.
Yeah.
So they should have a really good feel after that.
Right.
I don't think the HCQ advanced to a clinical of that size.
Right. All right. So looks like all the questions. Travis says this has been very informative. So thank you for coming on today and talking to everybody there.
Magilla. Yeah, had some fun. So this news about the Washington model might break today or tomorrow.
Yeah.
Or it might get swept under the rug. But to all our friends out in Making a Murder Land, you heard it first.
All right. So yeah, folks, if you hear debunking of the Washington model, the COVID-19 model, remember where you heard it first. There you go. And make sure you tweet at those people and let them know where you heard it first, just so that they know you, Magilla, said it first.
And remember, if anybody has a large home and has a big heart for having a gorilla as a pet,
there you go. Right.
Please drop by Mr. People's Pet Shop.
Mr. Peoples is always looking for another caretaker.
Absolutely. He loves me, but I don't know.
Right on. All right. Well, it's been fun. Thank you for being here. And everybody in the chat, thank you for being here. We're just trying to hopefully educate people, just give people more information. I mean, really, I want all of you to be safe. I really hope that I'm not going to hear over the next few months that somebody that I've gotten very close to in the last 4 years, that it went bad with COVID. I dread that. So everybody take care of yourselves. Just be careful. Take precautions. I mean, obviously you can't defend yourself 100% against this thing, but do what you can, and let's try to slow this thing down.
I think Travis might have offered me a home. So.
There you go. You got to go to Texas, though.
I've been to Texas.
It's hot.
Only during the day.
Only during the day. Yeah.
Well, it cools
right
down
on.
at night.
Yeah, it does. Same way here in LA. So
anyway. Yeah, because you get the ocean. Well,
that and it's a desert. So deserts generally tend to get pretty cold at night.
LA, you can go from the ocean front where it's always gorgeous to baking yourself to any level you want.
Right.
Go out into the desert.
All righty. So, okay. Thank you, Sharon. You take care. Everybody take care. Thank you for being here. Like I said, share this thing around. Let's hope, let's give people, try to keep, educating people and keep them informed. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe and we'll see ya.
All right. Thank you, everybody. All right, I better run to dinner. But
okay, buddy.